Hello students, welcome to the Analyst dated 24th of November 2023. Today we'll look at 5 important articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu. The first article will be regarding COP28 and this is in the perspective that COP28 is to be held in Dubai and we must look at the background. Then we'll look at social audit and this is in perspective of Manrega. Then we'll look at southern and the northern lights, which is Aurora Australis and Aurora Borealis. Then we look at the veto powers of the president and finally we look at the Ponzi scheme. Let's start with the first topic, that is COP28, and this is in purview of UNFCCC and it pertains to climate change, where it will be held in Dubai. Now in this perspective we must appreciate how the issue of, let's say, climate or in general environmental awareness, how it finally became a core part of public policy. So it all started with, let's say, the book of Rachel Carson in the name of Silent Springs. Then this culminated into models developed in MIT, which were called the limits of growth by Meadows and Forrester. Later on, we had a Stockholm conference. And all these efforts of going towards, let's say, environmental education, looking at environmental protection, looking at biodiversity degradation, looking at aspects of global warming, they were culminating into the Stockholm conference. And later on, we got the definition of sustainable development with the Brundtland Land Commission. Now, once that was happening, the most important event was the Rio Summit, or what we know as the Earth Summit of 1992. From the Earth Summit, from the Rio Summit of 1992. And in background, we must also appreciate that we also had Rio plus 10 and Rio plus 20. So two summits after a decade and after 2 decades of Rio 1992. So that was the importance of the Rio Summit. So one of the outcomes of the Rio Summit was your birth of UNFCCC. Now, when we look at UNFCCC, there are so many COPs, Conference of Parties, and these Conference of Parties will have some other outcomes. But when we look at the UPSC perspective, one important Conference of Parties was the COP of 1997, which gave us the Kyoto Protocol. And Kyoto Protocol was looking to limit global warming, but there was no binding targets. Now, the mechanisms which were used in the Kyoto Protocol was international emission trading. This is the first perspective. Then clean development mechanism. And the third is joint implementation. Joint implementation is when, let's say, two rich countries, two developed countries, they go for a common project, which is, let's say, helping in the fight against climate change. So that is joint implementation. Clean development mechanism is, let's say, a developed country is setting up, let's say, a renewable energy facility in a developing country. So that will be clean development mechanism or CDM. And international emissions trading, that is essentially setting up the carbon markets, the carbon trading cap and trade mechanism. Now, with the Kyoto Protocol set to expire, we needed a successor of the Kyoto Protocol. And the successor of the Kyoto Protocol came in the form of the Paris Agreement. Now, one part of the Paris Agreement is the NDCs, the Nationally Determined Contributions. Now here, what are we essentially saying when we talk about NDCs? So we are saying as a country, India would commit to something. India would like to do something, right? In what perspective? In our common fight, in our common global fight against a common global problem, that is climate change. So let's say I am promising to set up 200 gigawatts of renewable energy. So is it helping the world, right? Because we should appreciate that the world is one system. So if I am polluting, I am adding a lot of carbon, I am using a lot of carbon intensive sources, then immaterial of whether Europe goes towards Fit for 55 or let's say goes for net zero by 2050 itself. So there will be no outcome. Why? Because the carbon will travel all across the world, and naturally it will affect the glacial thaw, glacial retreat, glacial melting. It will affect ocean acidification, right? So all the ramifications of climate change will be visible, including the incessant rainfalls, including extreme climate events. So at this juncture, we must appreciate that every country will have to go for its nationally determined contributions. So I will say what I'll do, but these are not bindings. This is on a voluntary basis that I am committing, and this is on the basis of my respective capabilities. What capability I have, what size and shape my economy is. Let's say I am not able to feed my people, I am not able to provide shelter, I am not able to provide jobs, and still I am talking about what? I am talking about climate justice, I am talking about climate change, I am talking about energy transition. Then it doesn't make sense, even politically, for a smaller country. So first, you need food security, you need, let's say, livelihood, you need your houses, you need your jobs, right? So every country will require some amount of carbon emission for growth, for development. So to set up, let's say, an industry, to set up, let's say, let's say car manufacturing facility, or let's say mobile assembly factory, you need 24/7 electricity. If you need 24/7 electricity, you need a supply of, let's say, a sustainable source. When I'm saying sustainable, that means a continuous supply of source. So essentially, one of the best sources of such sustainable supply or continuous supply of electricity is coal. Now, if thermal power plant was cheaper for you, why would you go for renewable energy? If the technology that was being used in renewable energy projects was expensive and there was high royalties, and then you had to import everything from China, so why would you go about it? You would simply mine your coal and set up a thermal power plant. So every country to develop, to have its own fair share of equity towards development. Why do we want development? So that we can provide, the state or the government can provide to the people the basic necessities. It can enable the people to achieve their true potentials. So the state has to provide as a provider, right? And we must appreciate that over the period of time, we have become a welfare state, not only India, but across the world. So citizens are top priority. So if the state, if the government has one job set for itself, that is the betterment of people, the welfare of the people, the equitable distribution of resources, then I will have to fend for my people. And for that, I also need some space, some developmental space, or can I say, I want to emit some carbon. And can I say, I am also demanding some equitable carbon emissions based upon, let's say, my population. So India as a country would naturally demand more. Why? Because we have a large population. On the other hand, if we look at, let's say, the Western countries, what do we see? The per capita emission is extremely high. The per capita emission is extremely high. In India, if you see, the total emission will be high. In China, you have moderate per capita emissions, but you have very high population. So cumulatively, in every field, China will be on a target. But what about India? Has India reached the size of economy of China? Absolutely not. Are we trying to go there? Yes. We are trying for a $10 trillion economy, right? There are debates on the $5 trillion economy already. 4 trillion, 5 trillion, 10 trillion, right? So if I am vying for my developmental space, I need the space to emit carbon also. This is nothing but equitable carbon distribution. Now, Paris Agreement says that with the pace we are going ahead, and please appreciate the backdrop of two reports. One report is before the Paris Agreement, that is your AR5, Assessment Report 5, your IPCC Assessment Report, and then there is AR6, which has come nearby before the Glasgow Summit. So these reports are time and again telling that the way we are going about in terms of our carbon emissions, the way the developing countries, the more populous countries are going about, there is no chance to limit the increase in temperature by 2 degrees. Now, why 2 degrees? So the idea is that the Paris Agreement wise, it has a target that it wants to keep a lid, an upper ceiling on the increase in temperature from when? From the pre-industrial levels, right? So 2 degree, but it wants to do everything to keep it within 1.5 degree, right? That is the goal. Then every 5 years there will be a global stock take. That means it will be adjusted that all the countries, they gave some NDCs. Have they fulfilled their commitments? The commitments are not binding, but the reporting is binding. So if I have committed to something, then I will have to report whether I have done it or not, right? Now, there was something called as this $100 billion. This was annually pledged. This was a pledge. Okay. So a lot of companies would also pledge that they would invest $5 billion in a particular state. So similarly, $100 billion was pledged in terms of climate finance. Why do we need climate finance at all? We need climate finance because I want to move my economy from carbon intensive sources. I want to transition my economy. I want to shift my economy from the sources which are producing more carbon to an economy which produces less carbon. And finally, to a clean and green economy. To finally, let's say, we are looking for zero carbon usage, or let's say net zero. So depending upon the keywords, you will understand that the severity of these restrictions are different. When I am saying net zero, that means, let's say I am emitting some carbon and then I am sequestrating some carbon. That means I am kind of capturing some carbon, right? Let's say I am adding 10 kgs of carbon, but let's say I am planting so many trees that they are absorbing, let's say 10 kgs of carbon. So I am at net zero. So it totally depends upon how you are, what keywords are being used in terms of climate. Now, the next event is that we are looking at the COP26 of Glasgow. Now, Glasgow, what happened is that the entire international community, they went for the global stock take. That means the NDCs which were declared in Paris, and we must appreciate that the Kyoto Protocol was ending in 2020. So after 2020, we had to had something as a successor to the Kyoto Protocol. And Kyoto Protocol was not seen as a very successful story because of lack of participation of major powers. But when we look at the Paris Agreement saw a lot of wide scale representation from across the globe in terms of region also and in terms of country also. The commitments were also huge, not only in terms of NDCs but also in terms of the climate finance. But in Glasgow, there was a global stock take. Now India, what it did is it gave some NDCs in 2015, and by the time we reached Glasgow, right, and this was COP26. In COP26, when we reached Glasgow, the world was asking every country to commit more. So India also committed more, and the commitment that India made is known as the Panchamrit goals, and these goals are that India will increase its non-fossil fuel capacity or fossil energy capacity by 500 gigawatts. And simultaneously, 50% of India's energy will come from your renewable sources. Then India will reduce the total projected carbon emission by 1 billion tons from now to 2030. Then by 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by 45%. That means there was an increase of 10% here also. And what was the previous commitments? The previous commitments were made in Paris. Then by 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero, not 2050. So if the world is going towards 2050, if the world is looking, let's say, at 2045, many countries are looking at 2040, 2045, 2049, 2050, 2055. They have their own respective targets. But India also needs the cushion to grow. So that is the main issue. Now, the biggest criticisms that we see of the entire UNFCCC mechanisms is that the CBDR, the common but differentiated responsibility. When we look at responsibility, that is the biggest issue. While global climate change, it's a common responsibility of all the countries. But the responsibility has to be differentiated. Why? Because a country had, let's say, 200 years of unfettered power, unfettered monopoly, unfettered dominance on the global resources, on the global economic resources. And it was also a colonizer. So it polluted the world not only in its own sphere, but it went on to pollute other countries also, to cut down forest. Right from the Congo to, let's say, the Western Ghats, into India's northeast, to China. So all the countries which were erstwhile colonies were being controlled by the Western powers, who were in power for last 200 years, let's say. And these colonizers, let's say, going for 200 years, they were emitting carbon. Now suddenly, let's say today we are facing with the challenge of climate change. Suddenly you cannot say that we are facing a lot of climate change, so India, you act first. So what were you doing? What were you emitting for the last 200 years? You were also emitting. You were not emitting gold. You were emitting carbon only. So if you were emitting carbon, so you take more responsibility, because the total quantum of carbon you have released, and for the years that you have enjoyed the natural resources of the world, the West will naturally have more to pay. It will have to do more, but that is not being seen in reality. Then the issue of equity. Equity is nothing but the equality of opportunity. India wants the equity. India wants that it should get the time and space for development, because it is the basic rights of its people. So you cannot push down climate change on me until I develop. I cannot suddenly transition because the world is facing some problem. So suddenly I cannot stop my thermal power plants. I also have some commitment towards my people. My people also need jobs. They also need, or they also command some equity, right? All the opportunities are not for the Western citizens only. Then the idea of global carbon budget. Now let's say there is a budget. The budget is for 100 rupees. Now let's say you have spent only 2 rupees and I have spent 97 rupees, and you are saying now we have to pay equally. So out of the entire carbon budget, the Western powers, they have used majority of the budget, and now the blame is equally shared on everyone, right? Then the per capita emissions versus total emissions. So anytime we'll talk about, let's say, the total emissions, naturally India will be at a higher pedestal. Why? Because we have a large population. But when you look at the per capita usage of electricity, you look at the per capita usage of per capita emission of carbon. So any per capita, or you are looking at, let's say, per capita income. So what do you see? You see that the per capita income is lower, per capita emission is lower. But how are you pinning India down, or how are you pinning the developing countries down? By, let's say, if I have a low per capita, but I have a very high population base. So naturally the sum total of emissions will be high. And you can see that how the per capita of India is lower than that of Europe, of that of US. But the blame has to be equally shared. Then the pledges have deemed inefficient. So $100 billion, where is that $100 billion? And who got it? Who gave it? What about the technology sharing? What about the royalties that the same US companies would demand when they are sharing some technology of, let's say, solar energy, right? So the financial commitments doesn't even make, let's say, the cost of wars that the world is taking up. So billions of dollars are being thrown at any war, but the same $1 billion will not be thrown at, let's say, the climate change or its transition. Let's look at social audit. Manrega social audit crosses 50% of local bodies in just 6 states. Now, in this backdrop, we must appreciate that social audit is compulsory under the Narega Act or the Manrega Act itself. So it is mandatory to have social audit. Now, what do we understand by audit? Let's say you do a job, and after completion of the job, an independent person comes, or an independent authority comes, and they look at, let's say, the financial transactions. They look at what work you have done. They look at the entirety of the project that was given to you. And if they see to it whether you have done your work properly, whether the finances were managed properly, usually we understand audit like this. So this type of audit is usually a financial audit. It is about propriety, financial propriety. it is about embezzlement of funds, whether you were involved in any embezzlement, any kind of corrupt activities, or you have properly utilized the funds to the designated object of the funds without any conflict of interest, without any ill will, and after application of mind. You have not wastefully wasted the resources. And this financial audit usually we see in the case of CAG, right? Under Article 148. Now, but when we are looking at social audit, what do we want? So, let's say there is an executive engineer who is creating a tank, right? A junior engineer who is going for a tank creation based upon, let's say, the recommendations of the SDM. Now, this tank is to be created, but people come and they protest. People say, why are you creating the tank here? This is a land that we don't use. So people ask, why do you don't use? Because this is a community grazing land. So all our goats go there. If you make a tank here, you will create a boundary wall here. So where will the goat and sheep have their food? Can't you create it somewhere else? So at this moment of time, what has happened? That a top-down approach has been taken. A top-down approach has been taken of what? Of decision making. Here, what do we have? You have a bottom-up. What is this? This is an input that you get from, or is it a grievance? It can be seen as a grievance. It can be seen as a complaint, or it can be simply feedback. Is it the public opinion? Yes. Are the people important? Absolutely yes. They are the core of the democracy. So if people are important, their opinions are important. So if I am creating a project for them, for the people in a local area, should I take their opinion? Whether the project itself is good, whether the project helps them. Finally, I have, let's say, created the project. I have executed the project. Now, should I ask for some opinion? Some opinion from the Gram Sabha, from the local people, that did I do a good job, or do you need any improvement? Can I help you any further? So that is all about social audit, where you are trying to look at the impact that you have created, looking at the people, and the auditing is done by the people. And the auditing, after the auditing, if you find that there is any lacuna, any gaps, any developmental gap, so you try to fulfill it, right? So that is the moot idea of social audit. So you will identify, let's say, in the steps, the indicators of performance. You will collect data. What kind of data? It can be qualitative, it can be quantitative. Let's say in terms of quantitative data, maybe if it is a water project, I can look at the quality of water. If, let's say, it's an irrigation project, I can look at the soil moisture. If it is, let's say, about qualitative data, can I seek the opinion of people? Right. Can I seek some innovative local solution from the people also? Absolutely yes. Then on the basis of this, I can publish the report, and on the basis of that, some decision making can be done by the administration. So social audit becomes extremely important, because what do we see? We see that resources are being sent from top. Decisions are being, let's say, decentralized to, let's say, the lower level bureaucracy. After it has been decentralized, still at the local level, it is extremely centralized. So it is more of a top-down approach rather than a mix of top-down and bottom-up. And that is the idea of decision making, that there must be a two-way communication for any project. Simultaneously, what it is seen is that whenever there is audit, so there are lack of outcomes. There is issue of corruption, or what we can say, leakages. At times, it is seen that there is repetition. At times, what we have seen is that we have created toilets which are not being used, or we have created any infrastructure that is not being used, or we created an infrastructure which was not required at a particular place, but it was required just half a kilometer away, right? So that is why the public opinion or the to and fro communication becomes important. Now, what will be the impacts of a social audit? So it will involve the stakeholder. So are the people one of the most important stakeholders? Yes, we the people, right? It's in a democracy, we the people. The core is the people. So when I talk to the stakeholders, I give them the importance, then what happens? We are taking a stakeholder opinion. I am looking at the stakeholder's voice, which will foster what? It will foster proactive citizenry, and it will improve my citizen participation. Then a lot of input will come when I look at the social impact. What impact in terms of societal impact, what environmental impact, what economic impact, and what are the issues that the people are facing. So I'll learn about it. So it is about grassroots governance. And simultaneously, I will also strengthen the Panchayati Raj institutions. So I really want democratic decentralization at the grassroots level. So if I go for social audits, I am essentially going for empowerment of the Panchayati Raj institutions, because they are the institutions which are involved in finally conducting the social audit. Then it will naturally make the officers, the public functionary, not only the officers, but any public functionary who is, let's say, part of the state under Article 12, they will become more accountable to the people directly. So it is also about social accountability. It is also about transparency, because I am talking to you, after talking to you, I am taking a decision after a two-way communication. And in such cases, whenever we have more transparency, so transparency is like the antidote to corruption. So corruption naturally decreases, embezzlement of fund will decrease, and any kind of leakages will be curtailed, and the people will have more voice to complain against any wrongful acts. Then I have to improve the governance also, and I need to achieve good governance principles as said by the World Bank. Then I also need to strengthen my grassroots democracy. Now, most importantly, the vulnerable section, or can I say the voiceless, they also begin to participate in the participative decision making process, and this will help in terms of my equitable distribution. What kind of equitable distribution? Again, we are talking about the principle of equity. I'm not talking about equality. We are talking about equitable. That means if someone needs more rice, if someone needs, let's say, a water connection, but the other person doesn't require, so I will give the water connection to the person who is most needy. And this will also fulfill my goals of Antyodaya. But unfortunately, in today's news, what do we see? We see that social audit has become a tad bit slower in the states. Its implementation is lagging. Let's look at the Southern Lights. Now, Southern Lights, they have come to the limelight. Why? Because again, we are looking at a lot of research in these regions. That means we are looking at a lot of research in the polar areas. Why? Because it is in the backdrop of the changes that we are witnessing. And these changes are nothing but the tipping points. And these tipping points are telling us that the patterns of climate, the patterns which were visible in terms of, let's say, seasons, the patterns of, let's say, freeze and thaw, that is changing. And the intensity of the natural phenomena is also changing. Now, when we look at the northern or the southern lights, what are these? So they are beautiful displays in the sky. And where are they visible? They are visible in the night sky in the polar areas. Now, why are they visible there? Because what happens is that the sun goes through something called as the sunspot cycle. Sunspot cycle. And the sun also changes its magnetism, let's say this is the North Pole and this is the South Pole. So after few years, it will become, let's say, South, and this will become North. So the flip in magnetism in Sun and the sunspot cycle, they create a lot of fluctuations. Some heated areas on the sun's surface. What is the sun's surface called? It is the corona. It is the photosphere. So the outer layers of the sun will have some spots, some dark spots, and these dark spots will have lower temperature, lower energy. Why is that so? Because of the flip in the magnetic field of the sun. So this entire cycle is called the sunspot cycle. Because of this, some of the matter and some of the energy will come from the sun towards the planets, and Earth being one of the planet, these particles, they will be charged and they will hit Earth's own magnetic field. After hitting the magnetic field of the Earth, and why do we have a magnetic field on Earth? Because we have a liquid outer core on the Earth, right? So it is hitting the magnetic field of the Earth and they are being deflected. Some part of it, let's say, gets into the atmosphere, right? And in the atmosphere, these solar flares, which are originating from sun, traveling towards the Earth, they will react. They will react with the gases. What kind of gases are we talking about? Gases like nitrogen and oxygen. Once they make contact, these gases will be ionized. They will be ionized, right? So after ionization, they reach a plasma state. Once they reach the plasma state, and plasma state is nothing but the fourth stage of matter. The way there is solid, liquid, gas, similarly plasma is the fourth stage of matter. Now after some time, the ionized particles which were created, they will try to recombine. With this recombination comes the colors. The colors which are visible on the sky, and these colors are called the northern lights and the southern lights. The northern lights are called the aurora borealis and the southern light are aurora australis. Why? Because Australia is in the southern pole. Let's look at the veto powers. Now veto powers are the powers that are there with the president as well as the governor. Now here the context is that the Supreme Court is telling that the governor holds no veto power over bills. So this brings us to the topic of veto of the president. So two powers with the president and the governor. Now when we look at the president is the de jure head. The de jure head of the state. And as the head of the state, all the executive decisions are taken in his name. Simultaneously, we also need the presidential assent for a bill to become an act of the parliament. You need assent of the president. If you are going for the assent of the president can take some decision on the assent. If I am saying assent, I mean to say the president will decide whether the bill will become an act or not. Now, simultaneously, we must remember our fundamentals that a president is what? He is de jure head. So, who is the de facto head? This is the Prime Minister, right? Can I say the Prime Minister who is head of the cabinet also? In the cabinet also, there is a smaller group who are usually controlling the entire political party also, that we have seen. So when we look at the Prime Minister who is heading the Council of Ministers, the Prime Minister who is heading the cabinet, who is the elected head. So usually the Prime Minister would have the de facto power. Right? So if the prime minister has the de facto power, the decision of the president, being also called at times a rubber stamp, is taken in the form of the aid and advice of whom? Of Council of Ministers. But what do we see? Is the Council of Ministers meeting every time? Is the entire Council of Ministers, 70, 80 odd ministers, meeting every time the president is taking a decision? Or is it the cabinet which decides? Or is it a small cabinet committee which decides, which takes the call? Right? So, upon the aid and advice of the de facto head, that is the prime minister, what happens? The president finally takes a decision on assent or not. Now, when the president is taking the decision on the assent, what all the president can do? So, when we are talking about veto, we must also remember that the president can with the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers or with the aid and advice of the cabinet, over the period of time, they can allow the bill. If the bill is allowed, if the bill gets assent, so it becomes an act. If it doesn't, it is one type of veto. That means I am denying the bill. Now, I can deny the bill absolutely. That means I can say the bill will not be becoming an act, right? That is the power. So, such power can be used by the aid and advice. Or there might be a situational discretionary power. Like, let's say there is the aid of advice coming when there is, let's say, a member of the opposition is bringing a bill and that is somehow passed. Or let's say there is the bill has been passed. Once the bill has been passed, there is the cabinet or basically the government, it falls. So the new government which will come, they advise the president. So their cabinet, their Council of Ministers will now advise the president that the bill should be denied. So in such cases, absolute veto can be taken up. What about suspensive veto? Suspensive veto is when I am essentially saying that if there is some issue in the bill, I can ask the bill to be reconsidered. And upon reconsideration, if the bill comes again back to the president, then the president has to pass. But this is not applicable for your money bill. And I can also not go for suspensive veto on a constitutional amendment bill. Then, if I am looking at pocket veto, this is a unique kind of veto. This kind of veto is not available with the US president. He has to give assent in 10 days. So there is a time limit on the pocket. But in India, there is no time limit. And this is again a stalling method, that the president is not looking at a particular bill at all, not taking a decision at all. So keeping it in abeyance. So that is also a type of veto, that is pocket veto. Let's look at the Ponzi scheme. Now, a Ponzi scheme is nothing but a fraud, a financial fraud. Now, what happens is that there is a promoter and the promoter will start recruiting members. And let's say he got 2 members. Now, if these 2 members, they can get 2 new members, then this person will earn 5,000 rupees. Okay. But every new member will pay 5,000 rupees. Right. So now what has happened? That on admission, these two gave 5,000, 10,000 rupees. With this 10,000, 5,000 was given back to him. But he also gave 5,000. Right? because he became a member first. So he gave 5,000. So now he is at zero profit, zero loss. But let's say this guy, he recruits 2 new members, somehow scams 2 new members to become a part of a network. So now what will happen? His fees will be waived, but this person will start getting some commission. Why? Because this entire tree of network, it started from this single member. So through this, what happens is usually what happens is that a network is created and the promoter, who is the boss, who has created the scam, and the top tier management, they become extremely wealthy and they get a lot of funds. Once they get a lot of funds, they will vanish. They will vanish in thin air. So such is the structure of a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme. The idea is that if a new member joins, then I will earn some money. So to whoever the network belongs, no matter how many people join, if any person joins anywhere, let's say this is a new member who has just joined. So if this person joins, this person will earn money, this person will earn money, this person will earn money, and this person will earn money. Because they have created the network. But who will earn the most? The most will be here, then here, then here, then here, right? So if he now increases, then again supply of money. So what we are essentially seeing, if new members keep on growing, so what happens? Some people are able to make money. But let's say this is a localized scam right now, okay? Let's say this is a localized scam. Let's say this is run from Darjeeling. Now from Darjeeling, what happens is that it goes to parts of South Bengal, or let's say it spreads into Odisha, and the Odisha police gets after it. So what will happen? Suddenly I will arrest these people. So what will happen? The flow of money which was going from below, it will decrease. The moment the flow of money which was being pumped from the new member, that 5,000 rupees scam, so that is stopped, and so what will happen? This network will come down crashing, because there is no business model itself. They are saying that we are entrepreneurs, and as entrepreneurs, what are you doing? You are simply selling the same stuff that you have sold to me. Let's say 1 year ago, I am selling it to new people, and the people that I recruited few months back, they are selling it to some other, creating a network thereof. This is the usual structure of Ponzi scheme. And what are the red flags? So usually they do not have a business model. They do not have any operations. And to shield their lack of business model, what they will start doing, it is, let's say, get some cheap products, brand it as a new brand. Let's say some Ayurvedic capsules, let's say some massager, and they will add it in the business to show that they are a legitimate business. And then there will be overpricing of articles. Let's say a simple Chavanprash for 1750 rupees, which in the market is available for 250 rupees. A toothpaste for 450 rupees, which is for 60 rupees, right? So you will see that new brands will be coming up, they will be creating these networks, and then once they spread to 2 to 3 states, then the police is after them, then the network crashes and the people are looted of their money, their hard-earned money. So that is the Ponzi scheme. Now the point is that the Ponzi scheme, it promises. How do you understand that it's a Ponzi scheme? And because there is the new investment or the new participant is the only source of money. You do not have a true business. You are just showing it as a business. There is no business. Then if you look at the paperwork, there is no paperwork. There is no taxation. There is no GST number. So unregistered people running businesses, no office premises, no data on MCA, right? So that is how you look. And when it will collapse? When recruiting new investors become difficult, or when existing investors withdraw in large sums. And how do I stop people? What is the lure that I give? so that I stop people from making money? I'll say the moment you withdraw 20% of the money that you have made, so what will happen? You will not have any more income from the network. So this way, even big players are stopped from withdrawing their money, right? Or they are only able to partly withdraw their money. So end of the day, what happens? The promoter and few key accomplices, they fly away with the money, they embezzle the money, and it is part of, again, organized crime. So that is Ponzi scheme for you. Thank you so much. I hope it helped.